It was the year 1947, in the heart of the Straits of Malacca, when an eerie silence swallowed the vast expanse of the sea. The night was clear and the moonlight glimmered on the dark waters. But deep within the ocean, something sinister was about to unfold. The SS Ourang Medan, a freighter ship traveling from Indonesia to Costa Rica, had been making its way through the dangerous yet vital route in the Straits of Malacca. On board, there were roughly 30 crew members, all of whom were unaware of the gruesome fate that awaited them. The ship's radio operator, an experienced man named Robert Haley, was the first to notice something wrong. At first, the ship's routine was typical, but then a strange distortion interrupted his routine transmissions. The distress call came in at 2:25 a.m. "This is SS Ourang Medan. All officers, including the captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge. Possibly the whole crew is dead. I die." The message ended abruptly, with the final words hanging in the air, unresolved. Robert immediately began broadcasting the message again, trying to gather some clarity, but it was all for nothing. The voice had vanished into the eerie silence of the night. Something about the tone, the panic, and the abruptness left an unsettling chill in the air. No one on the nearby ships could believe what they had heard, but soon after, they were left with no choice but to respond. A rescue mission was dispatched immediately, though no one could predict the horrors they would uncover. As dawn broke, Captain Kenneth Matthews and his crew aboard the nearby Dutch ship, the Ryan, set sail to investigate the strange distress call. The sea seemed calm, almost deceptively so. There was an unnatural stillness as the Ryan made its way towards the coordinates of the last transmission. The air grew heavy with the anticipation of what might lie ahead. By the time they reached the SS Ourang Medan, something was terribly wrong. There was no sign of life. The ship was eerily still, almost abandoned, drifting in the waters. The Ryan's crew carefully boarded the freighter, making their way onto the deck, where a strange, inexplicable smell hit them first. A pungent odor that seemed to emanate from the ship itself, overpowering and sickening. "There's no sign of damage," Captain Matthews remarked, his voice steady, though his eyes were cautious, scanning every corner of the ship. "It doesn't make sense. This vessel was operating just fine last night." They slowly made their way through the ship, finding no crew in sight. Yet, as they reached the bridge, the first true sign of horror began to reveal itself. The radio operator's body lay slumped over the equipment, his hands still frozen in a final desperate attempt to send out a signal. The officers had been found. Each man was dead, their faces contorted in expressions of absolute terror. But there were no visible wounds, no injuries, just sheer terror. They were all frozen in that one moment, as if something had stolen the life from them before their eyes. "God," one of the crew members whispered, stepping back in shock. "What could have done this?" And that was when they noticed it. The bodies weren't the only thing strange about the ship. The crew, dead as they were, had been twisted into unnatural positions, their faces locked in frozen, agonized expressions. But that wasn't the worst part. As Captain Matthews and his crew ventured deeper, they began to sense a presence on the ship, something cold, malevolent, clinging to the walls. It felt as though they were being watched. There was no explanation for the inexplicable chill creeping up their spines, no answer to the sense of dread that seemed to pervade the air. It was when they reached the cargo hold that things took a far darker turn. The first mate, a man named Jonathan Rourke, was the first to scream. He had stepped into the hold, where they expected to find crates of goods, ordinary, nondescript cargo. But what they found was far worse. There, among the crates, the bodies of the crew were scattered in similarly twisted postures. It was as though they had been tossed around like rag dolls, left to die in the cold shadows of the ship. Suddenly, the Ourang Medan began to creak, and the very air seemed to shift. Without warning, the ship shook violently, and the unmistakable sound of a deep rumble echoed from below the deck. The ship lurched as though it had come to life, and moments later the air was filled with the deafening roar of an explosion. The entire ship was obliterated in a terrifying burst of flames. The crew of the Rhine barely escaped with their lives, watching in horror as the once proud freighter sank beneath the waves. The very ocean seemed to swallow it whole, as if it had never existed. The last communication from the Ourang Medan had been received, but it offered no answers. What had caused the crew's deaths? What had they encountered on that forsaken vessel? The mystery of the SS Ourang Medan has remained unsolved for decades. Despite numerous theories, ranging from ghostly entities to illicit cargo, no one has ever been able to determine the true cause of the deaths. Some say it was a curse. Others claim it was the work of something far more terrifying, but no one knows for sure. As for the legend of the Ourang Medan, it continues to haunt the waves, a mystery that will never truly be solved. The eerie transmission that once echoed through the stillness of the night still lingers, and the world waits, questioning what really happened aboard that doomed vessel. Days passed after the disappearance of the SS Ourang Medan, and the ocean remained eerily calm, hiding the dark secrets beneath its surface. The ship's sudden explosion had left more questions than answers. The survivors of the rescue mission were left in a state of shock, and the mysterious circumstances surrounding the deaths of the crew members sparked rumors across the maritime world. Captain Kenneth Matthews and his crew, who had narrowly escaped the catastrophe, were questioned by authorities, but no satisfactory explanation could be found. Their recount of the incident painted a vivid picture of terror, a ship that had been alive one moment and gone the next. But the world had no concrete answers, and the investigation had only just begun. The Rhine returned to port, and the news of the SS Ourang Medan spread like wildfire. Maritime authorities, eager to uncover the truth, sent a team of investigators to examine the wreckage of the freighter. Inspector Harold Jenkins, a seasoned investigator with years of experience in maritime accidents, was assigned to the case. He had seen his fair share of shipwrecks, but nothing had prepared him for the horrors of the Ourang Medan. Upon arrival at the scene, the wreckage of the Ourang Medan was barely visible above the waterline, with only the twisted remains of the ship's hull protruding from the waves. The rest of the ship had been swallowed by the sea, as if it had been devoured by some ancient, dark force. Inspector Jenkins and his team carefully surveyed the wreckage, noting that there was no sign of fire damage, only the marks of an intense explosion from within the ship's core. What caused this? Jenkins muttered to himself, pacing along the deck of the Rhine as he looked at the wreckage. A ship doesn't explode for no reason. The investigation began with the bodies of the crew. Autopsies were performed, but the findings only deepened the mystery. There were no visible wounds or signs of physical trauma, yet the expressions on the crew members' faces told a different story. They had been frozen in terror, their eyes wide open as if they had seen something beyond comprehension. The medical examiner, Dr. Susan Thompson, noted that their pupils were dilated, their muscles tensed, as if they had died in the midst of an overwhelming fear. "This doesn't make sense," Dr. Thompson said, shaking her head. "These men were not killed by any physical means. Something else, something unnatural must have caused this." Jenkins was determined to uncover the truth. He spent days poring over the ship's logs and radio transmissions. The last message received from the SS Ourang Medan was chilling, but there was little information to go on. The ship had been carrying a seemingly harmless cargo of tobacco and other goods, nothing out of the ordinary. There were no signs of piracy, no evidence of foul play. It all seemed so ordinary. So why had something so horrific happened to the crew? One theory that had begun circulating among the crew of the Rhine was that the ship had been cursed. The ship's name, Ourang Medan, which roughly translates to the Man of Medan in Malay, seemed to carry an ominous weight. Some believed that the ship was haunted, cursed by an ancient spirit that had claimed the lives of the crew. Inspector Jenkins dismissed the notion of a curse. But the more he investigated, the more it became clear that something had caused the crew to die in a way that no natural explanation could account for. Crew members hadn't drowned, they hadn't been shot or stabbed, there were no signs of a violent struggle, they had simply died, frozen in terror. But that wasn't the only mystery. The smell. Jenkins couldn't shake the memory of the pungent odor that had filled the ship. It was a rancid, sickening stench that had seemed to permeate every corner of the vessel. It wasn't the smell of death, but something far worse. Something alien. The source of the smell was never identified. It was as though it had been brought onto the ship by some unseen force. Late one evening, as Jenkins reviewed his notes in his cabin aboard the Ryan, he received an unexpected call. It was from Captain Matthews. "Inspector, you need to see this," Matthews said, his voice tight with urgency. "We found something." Jenkins was on his feet in an instant. Within minutes, he was back on the deck of the Ryan, making his way to the captain's quarters. Matthews greeted him with a grave look, and without a word, handed Jenkins a small piece of paper. It was an old, weathered map, one that looked like it had been torn from a book. "I've seen this before," Jenkins muttered, his brow furrowing as he examined the map. "This is a map of the Straits of Malacca, but it's marked with a location I don't recognize." Matthews nodded. "Exactly. It's a location about 30 miles off the coast, near the deep waters. No one's ever charted it. And the strange thing is, the coordinates match up with the location where the Ourang Medan last broadcasted its distress call." Jenkins stared at the map in silence for a long moment. "So you're saying the Ourang Medan wasn't just in the wrong place at the wrong time?" "I'm afraid it's more than that," Matthews replied grimly. "It's as though the ship was drawn to this place. And I think it's more than just a coincidence. There's something there, something hidden beneath the waters." The next morning, Jenkins and Matthews led an expedition to the coordinates marked on the map. The water was colder than they had anticipated, and the air was thick with a heavy fog. As their boat approached the location, the sea seemed to grow unnaturally still, as though it was holding its breath. And then, without warning, something surfaced. A shadow, dark and massive, rose slowly from beneath the water. It was a ship, an old, decaying vessel, one that had been submerged for years. But it was no ordinary wreck. The ship was unlike any Jenkins had ever seen. The hull was covered in strange markings, symbols he didn't recognize. And there, on the deck, was something even more chilling, an outline of a figure that seemed to be watching them from the deck. Jenkins's heart raced as he realized the implications. The ship, the Ourang Medan, had not been alone. The sea around them was silent, unnaturally so. The air felt heavy, oppressive. As Jenkins and Captain Matthews stared at the ghostly outline of the submerged vessel, their boat drifted closer to the wreckage. The fog had thickened, and the water beneath seemed to pulsate, as though something were moving just out of sight. The world felt distant, isolated, and the silence was deafening. "That ship," Matthews murmured, breaking the heavy quiet. "It looks like it's been here for years, but why didn't it sink like the others?" Jenkins squinted at the decaying vessel, the strange symbols on its hull glowing faintly through the mist. They were unlike anything he had ever seen. Ancient, alien, perhaps even cursed. He could feel a strange pressure building in his chest, a sensation he couldn't explain. "We need to go closer," Jenkins said, his voice steady despite the dread creeping up his spine. "If the Ourang Medan ended up here, it wasn't by accident." The boat rocked gently as they approached the wreck. There were no sounds except for the occasional creaking of the boat and the faint sound of the water slapping against the hull. The closer they got to the submerged ship, the heavier the air felt. And then, just as they neared the wreck, a loud bang echoed from the ship. Jenkins and Matthews froze. It was a strange sound, like something hitting the ship's deck with immense force. "Did you hear that?" Matthews asked, his eyes wide. Jenkins nodded, his heart racing. I did. It came from inside the wreck. Without a word, they signaled to the crew on their boat to approach the wreck carefully. The two of them climbed into a small dinghy, the boat creaking ominously under their weight as it drifted closer to the mysterious vessel. As they neared the ship's hull, they could see the strange markings more clearly. The symbols were etched deeply into the wood, glowing faintly as if alive. Jenkins's gaze lingered on them, feeling as though they were beckoning him. His fingers itched to touch the surface, to understand what these markings meant. But there was something more pressing, something that gnawed at him from within. "Captain, you feel that?" Jenkins asked. Matthews looked at him, his face pale. "Yeah, it's like the air is thick with something." Jenkins nodded slowly. "Whatever's inside this wreck, it's not natural." They moved closer to the ship, the strange symbols glowing brighter as they got nearer. The air felt electric, charged with something otherworldly. The fog parted briefly, and for a moment, Jenkins thought he saw something, movement on the deck of the ship. There was a figure standing at the edge of the wreck. It was tall, humanoid, but its outline was blurred. The figure seemed to shimmer in the mist, vanishing and reappearing in flashes. Jenkins grabbed Matthews by the arm, his heart pounding. "Did you see that?" Matthews, wide-eyed, nodded. "What in God's name was that?" They moved closer to the wreck, their boat now just a few feet away from the ship's deck. Jenkins' breath caught in his throat as he realized that the figure wasn't just a mirage. It was real. But what kind of person could survive here, in this haunted place? Who was the figure, and why had it appeared now? Suddenly, the fog closed in around them again, and the figure was gone. But the silence remained, thick and suffocating. "Let's board the ship," Jenkins said, his voice tight with urgency. "We need to find answers. Whatever happened to the Ourang Medan, this is where it started." Climbing aboard the wreck was no easy task. The ship was unstable, its boards creaking ominously under their feet as they stepped onto the rotting deck. The faint smell of decay filled the air, but it was mixed with something far worse. A smell of death, of something ancient and forgotten. Jenkins' heart raced as he moved cautiously forward, his hand gripping the railing for balance. Matthews was right behind him, equally cautious. The ship was eerily quiet, but something else lingered in the air, an intangible presence, as though they were not alone. The silence was broken by a soft noise, a faint scratching sound coming from below deck. Jenkins motioned for Matthews to be quiet as they both crept toward the stairs leading below the ship. The scratching grew louder, more frantic, as though someone was desperately trying to escape. Jenkins couldn't move, frozen, not just in fear, but as if something unseen had wrapped icy fingers around his spine. The air in the room was dense. Every breath felt like swallowing fog. He stared at the shadowy crew, eyes bulging, mouths agape in silent screams, their faces eerily lit by the flickering flashlight. Matthews whispered sharply, "Jenkins, we need to get out, now!" But Jenkins stepped forward instead. "Wait," he said quietly, raising his hand. "They're trying to say something." The whispers began again, a collective murmur, unintelligible, layered voices overlapping one another like a broken radio. Then suddenly, one voice cut through the others. "The cargo, not meant for men, sealed below, don't open it." Then silence. Every spirit in the room vanished, gone, as if sucked out of the air itself. The temperature in the room immediately shifted, warmer, lighter. Jenkins looked around, chest heaving. "What the hell was that?" Matthews rasped. "That wasn't... Ghosts don't speak like that." "I don't think they're ghosts," Jenkins muttered. "They're trapped, caught in something far worse." Back on the deck, the fog had thinned slightly, revealing more of the wreck. Jenkins turned to Matthews, determined. "There's a cargo hold below. We need to find it." Matthews looked uneasy. "Did you not hear what the voice said? Don't open it." "That sounds like a clear warning to me." "Exactly," Jenkins said. "And warnings usually come when there's something powerful or dangerous. If we find it, Maybe we can figure out what doomed the Ourang Medan." Reluctantly, Matthews nodded. They moved through the creaking hallways of the ship, deeper into its rotting heart. Strange markings continued along the walls, etched into the metal and wood, glowing ever so faintly. Jenkins took photos of them as they went, planning to send them to a contact he had, an old linguist familiar with ancient sea runes. They reached the lower deck. The door to the cargo hold was locked shut with chains wrapped several times around the handle. Old, rusted, but still holding strong. Someone, long ago, really didn't want this door opened. There were symbols burned into the steel, not carved, but burned, as if scorched into the very metal with fire. Matthews wiped sweat from his brow. "I have a bad feeling about this." Jenkins found a crowbar and began to work on the lock. The chains clanged loudly with every pull, echoing down the dead corridors of the ship like distant thunder. Finally, snap. The lock broke. Jenkins hesitated for a moment, heart pounding, then slowly pulled open the heavy door. A wave of putrid air escaped, hitting them like a wall. It smelled of sulfur and something else, something ancient and rotting. Inside, the cargo hold was pitch black. They stepped inside. Their flashlight beams pierced the darkness, revealing dozens of wooden crates. Each was sealed tightly with thick rope and wax, stamped with symbols similar to the ones on the ship's hull. On closer inspection, the symbols didn't match any known language, but Jenkins felt an instinctive chill when he looked at them. Then they noticed one crate that had already been broken open. Split down the middle, its contents gone. Jenkins stepped closer and froze. There were bones inside the crate. Not human, not animal. Twisted fragments of something unrecognizable, scorched, blackened, and oddly ancient, as if they'd been buried for centuries. "What were they transporting?" Matthews asked, his voice low. Jenkins didn't answer. He was staring at the floor near the broken crate. There were footprints, but not human ones. Three-toed clawed prints, burned into the metal floor, as if whatever walked here had left behind its heat. Suddenly, bang! Something slammed the cargo door shut behind them. The flashlight flickered violently. Darkness. Silence. Then came the whispering again. "You opened it. Now we cannot leave." The temperature dropped sharply. Frost began forming on the inside of the cargo hold. The crates rattled as if something within them was moving, trying to get out. Matthews banged on the door. "Open up! Let us out!" But the door didn't budge. Jenkins held up his flashlight, scanning the room. One of the unopened crates had begun to leak. A thick, black mist was seeping from its cracks, coiling like smoke, but heavier, like it had weight. The mist twisted into strange shapes, briefly forming distorted faces that screamed without sound. Jenkins stepped back. Then the whisper returned, louder this time. It was sealed for a reason. Suddenly, the mist shot toward them. Matthews screamed, dropping his flashlight. The light hit the floor and spun wildly, casting twisted shadows across the cargo hold. Jenkins grabbed Matthews by the jacket and pulled him away from the black fog. "We have to burn it!" Jenkins shouted. "Burn the crate before it escapes!" Matthews pulled out a flare from his bag, one of the few things he had grabbed before boarding. With shaking hands, he lit it, the red glow flaring to life in the dark. Jenkins took it and hurled it into the leaking crate. There was a low, rumbling groan from deep within the ship, as if the vessel itself had been wounded. The mist shrieked. The flames ignited the wood instantly, and the black fog recoiled violently, screeching like an animal in pain. The crate burst into flames, and so did two others nearby. The room lit up with roaring fire, smoke billowing upward. Jenkins kicked open the door. It had miraculously unlocked. They ran, through the halls, up the stairwells, back to the deck. Behind them, the ship rumbled, groaned, and began to shift. The fog twisted upward, forming a vortex in the sky above, spinning unnaturally fast. Wind howled, and lightning cracked across the clouds. The Ourang Medan began to collapse inward, imploding slowly as if the fire had triggered a chain reaction. They leapt into their boat, yelling for the crew to move. As they sped away, the cursed ship behind them was engulfed in flame, black fog swirling into the sky like smoke from a volcano. And then, boom, the Ourang Medan exploded. A shockwave of wind and light blasted outward, sending waves across the sea. The crew ducked, shielding themselves. When they looked back, nothing remained. No fire, no wreckage, no fog, just calm water and silence. Jenkins and Matthews sat in silence on the rescue boat, staring at the empty horizon where the SS Ourang Medan had just exploded and vanished. No debris, no oil slick, not even ash. "Ships don't just disappear like that," Matthews muttered. Jenkins, still clutching his soaked notebook, stared into the void. "They do, if they were never supposed to be found in the first place." Behind them, the rescue crew was shaken. One of the sailors, Ramos, crossed himself repeatedly, murmuring prayers under his breath. But Jenkins wasn't thinking about the explosion. He was thinking about the symbols, the voice that whispered it was sealed for a reason. And more than anything, the cargo they briefly saw. There was something unnatural in those crates. Back on land, within 24 hours, they were taken in for debriefing at a naval intelligence facility. Jenkins and Matthews were separated, interrogated by stern officers who didn't speak much, but took copious notes. "What exactly did you see on board?" one of the agents asked. "Bodies," Jenkins said. "Frozen stiff, eyes wide open like they'd seen something. Not of this world. Any survivors?" "None. And then the ship exploded." The agent paused. "Did you open the cargo hold?" Jenkins narrowed his eyes. "Why would you ask that?" The man didn't answer, just closed his notebook and stood. "You'll be contacted again." Jenkins knew something was off. A week passed. Matthews disappeared. No calls, no messages. His apartment was abandoned. Lights still on, food rotting on the table, his bag untouched. Jenkins began receiving anonymous letters, handwritten in red ink. "You should have let it sink." Then another. "The seal is broken." And then a parcel. No return address. Inside was a burnt ledger, charred at the edges but still legible. It was the ship's original logbook from 1947, June 13th, 1947. "We picked up 17 crates from Port Klang. No manifest, no customs clearance, marked untouchable. Smelled strange, crew uneasy. June 15th, 1947. Third mate found babbling nonsense in the mess hall. Said they're whispering to me from the box. He gouged out his own eyes. June 16th, 1947. Captain ordered hold sealed. Priest brought on board, no idea from where. Said the items were not of this earth. Drew symbols on the walls. June 18th, 1947. Something got out. June 19th, 1947. All officers are dead. We are hearing voices in our heads. I die. The final page just had one thing written in jagged script. The void is hungry. Jenkins stared at the last line, chills running down his spine. This wasn't just a cursed ship. It was a vessel of containment, a prison for something, not someone, that was never meant to surface again. But now, it had been released, and it was looking for a new host. That night, Jenkins awoke with a jolt. There was whispering in his apartment, not outside, inside. He turned on the light. Empty room. But the mirror was fogged up. He walked toward it slowly, breath trembling. Wrote with his finger on the foggy glass. Just as he pulled away, new words appeared beneath his writing. "You touched it." The lights flickered. Then, his reflection smiled back at him. But Jenkins wasn't smiling. The mirror incident had left him shaken. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the ship, floating silently. The crew's faces frozen in death, and the words burned into his brain. You touched it. What had he touched? He only stepped into the cargo hold for a second before the explosion. But that second had changed everything. He needed answers, and there was only one place that might hold them. The old naval archive. At the edge of the port, tucked behind rusted gates and forgotten files, was a locked archive building, decommissioned decades ago. Jenkins remembered the archivist who once helped him research shipwrecks. With enough bribe money and desperation in his voice, he got access. The room smelled like mildew, secrets, and rot. He searched for hours, sifting through dusty records and brittle paper. Nothing came up for Ourang Medan in the official logs. It was as if the ship never existed. But then, in a restricted drawer, hidden inside a weathered manila envelope labeled Incident Ghost Ship 1947, he found it. A photograph, black and white, blurry, but unmistakable. It showed the SS Ourang Medan at dock, crates being loaded by men in hazmat suits. One of the crates had the same symbol Jenkins saw on the walls of the cargo hold, an eye inside a triangle, but the eye was bleeding. Below the photo was a typed page marked Classified for Naval Intelligence Only, Top Secret Excerpt, Decrypted Code 1947. Subject, recovered artifact from Dutch East Indies excavation, believed to be pre-human origin. Emits low-frequency sound waves. Crew members report hallucinations, violent seizures, and in some cases, death by unknown cause. Exposure time should not exceed 8 minutes. Codename, Whisperer. This is not to be opened. Store at sea, far from civilization. Jenkins stepped back. The Ourang Medan wasn't just carrying illegal cargo. It was carrying a weapon. Something not made by man. Something older than time. But if it exploded, why were there still whispers? That night, Jenkins noticed something strange on his skin. A mark, faint, almost like a burn. But it wasn't there before. It looked like a circle of symbols, like the ones the priest had drawn in the cargo hold. Except this mark was moving. The lines shifted slightly every time he looked away, and every night since the mirror message he heard the same whisper before sleep. You are chosen. Desperate, Jenkins found one last lead. A woman named Dr. Adelaide Koenig, a disgraced linguist and symbologist who had worked on deciphering ancient artifacts for the Dutch Navy. She vanished in the late 1950s after claiming she translated a language spoken only by the sea, but rumors said she was still alive, hiding in the islands of Indonesia off the grid. Jenkins booked a flight. Whatever was on that ship, whatever got out, it had left a mark on him, and he was running out of time. As his plane took off from the mainland, he glanced out the window. In the clouds below, just for a second, he saw a massive, rusted ship floating in the sky, wreathed in fog, the SS Ourang Medan, and somewhere inside something opened its eyes. Jenkins landed on the humid Indonesian island as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting blood-red streaks across the sky. The air was thick with the scent of salt and jungle. The locals whispered of Dr. Adelaide Koenig, the mad woman of the forest, but no one dared approach her. Armed with the mysterious ledger, the mark on his arm burning faintly, and an urgency he couldn't explain, Jenkins ventured into the dense undergrowth. Each step seemed to pull him deeper into a place where time itself felt wrong. Shadows moved independently, and faint whispers rode the wind, repeating, "You are chosen." Hours later, Jenkins found a small, weather-beaten hut hidden beneath a canopy of ancient trees. Inside sat Adelaide, her eyes sharp yet haunted, fixed on Jenkins immediately. Without a word, she motioned him inside, and as the door closed behind him, Jenkins realized the true horror wasn't what was outside. It was what waited to be uncovered inside her mind. Adelaide's hut was cluttered with ancient scrolls, strange artifacts, and books whose pages whispered in forgotten tongues. She spoke in a low, trembling voice. The artifact, the Whisperer, it's not just an object. It's a vessel, a prison for a voice older than humanity. Jenkins showed her the mark on his arm. Her eyes widened. That mark means it has chosen you, she said. The Whisperer communicates through symbols, sounds, and even dreams. It feeds on fear, spreading madness until it breaks free. Jenkins shivered. Is there a way to stop it? Adelaide nodded slowly. There is. But it requires a ritual at sea, at the exact location where the Ourang Medan sank. and you'll need to confront what's inside." The whispers grew louder outside the hut, seeping through the walls. "We have no time," Jenkins said, gripping the burnt ledger. "I have to finish this." The next morning, Jenkins and Adelaide set out on a battered fishing boat, cutting through fog that clung to the water like a living shroud. The sea around the Straits of Malacca was calm, deceptively so. As they approached the coordinates where the Ourang Medan had vanished, Jenkins felt the familiar burning on his arm intensify, the mark pulsing like a heartbeat. Adelaide began chanting in the ancient language, her voice trembling yet commanding. Suddenly, the water around them darkened, swirling into unnatural shapes. The whispers returned, a low hum rising into a crescendo of voices, some pleading, some warning, some laughing with cruel malice. From the depths, the water churned violently. Jenkins stared in horror as a massive shadow rose, breaking the surface. Not a creature, but a mass of writhing tendrils, eyes opening like black pits within the mass. The Whisperer had returned. As the monstrous mass of tendrils towered above the water, Jenkins gripped Adelaide's hand tightly, the mark on his arm seared like a live wire. Adelaide's chanting grew louder, her voice weaving through the roaring wind. The Whisperer pulsed with dark energy, tendrils reaching toward the sky like desperate fingers grasping at the stars. Suddenly, Jenkins felt a surge of power from within, a light piercing the darkness in his mind. Memories, voices, warnings flooding in all at once. He realized the Whisperer wasn't just an enemy. It was a guardian, or a prisoner, trapped in a timeless war with something far worse. With renewed resolve, Jenkins joined the chant, channeling every ounce of willpower to bind the entity once again. The sea calmed, the darkness receded, and for a moment, silence reigned. But Jenkins knew this was just the beginning. The calm after the storm was eerie, almost unnatural. Jenkins and Adelaide sat silently, catching their breath, the ritual's energy still humming faintly in the air. Then, Adelaide whispered, "The Whisperer's power is tied to the crew's souls, trapped, tortured, unable to move on." Jenkins felt a chill. So freeing them means facing what really happened on the Ourang Medan? Adelaide nodded gravely. Yes, the crew didn't die from accident or sickness. They were sacrificed, part of an ancient pact gone wrong. Suddenly the water shimmered, and ghostly figures emerged, transparent, eyes hollow, faces frozen in terror. They drifted closer, whispering names, memories, fragments of their final moments. Jenkins realized these were the souls trapped aboard the ghost ship, begging for release. With newfound purpose, Jenkins vowed to break the curse, even if it meant confronting horrors beyond imagination. Jenkins leaned closer to the ghostly figures, their whispers swirling in the salty air. One spirit, a tall man with a cracked naval uniform, spoke clearly. "The artifact cursed us all. The captain went mad. We tried to throw it overboard, but it wouldn't leave." The voices, the whispers. Adelaide's eyes widened in recognition. The artifact was a beacon, a trap. Jenkins frowned. Who set the trap? Suddenly the shadows shifted and a new presence appeared. A figure cloaked in darkness, eyes glowing with malice. "It was never meant to be found," the figure hissed. "You meddle in affairs beyond your understanding." Jenkins felt the mark burn fiercely, but he stood firm. "We will end this, for the crew, for everyone." The dark figure laughed, a sound that chilled Jenkins to the bone. "Then come, face your fate." The dark figure loomed, its form flickering like smoke in the moonlight. Jenkins felt fear clawing at his chest, but the burning mark on his arm ignited a fierce determination. Adelaide stepped forward, chanting louder, weaving protective symbols in the air. The shadow lunged, a torrent of darkness swirling toward them. But Jenkins raised the ledger, its pages glowing with an ethereal light. Words of power, ancient and unyielding, flowed from him, pushing the shadow back. The sea churned violently, lightning cracked the sky, and the air thickened with tension. This was no ordinary fight. It was a battle between light and shadow, sanity and madness. With one final chant, the shadows screamed, dissipating into nothingness. Jenkins gasped, the mark fading. They had won, for now. The storm raged on, waves crashing against the fragile fishing boat as Jenkins and Adelaide held their ground. The sea was a furious beast, whipped into a frenzy by the unseen forces below. Jenkins stared at the burning mark on his arm, its heat pulsing in rhythm with his pounding heart. The ancient ledger was clutched tightly in his hand, its pages glowing faintly, casting eerie shadows across Adelaide's determined face. "The Whisperer's essence is tied to this place," Adelaide said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. "If we don't complete the ritual here and now, its power will only grow." A sudden chill swept over them. Even as the storm howled, the water around the boat began to shimmer, and from the depths emerged the dark figure. More solid this time, its eyes glowing with a fierce malevolence. Jenkins took a deep breath and began chanting the words inscribed in the ledger. Adelaide joined him, their voices intertwining with the thunder, weaving a powerful spell that seemed to push back the darkness inch by inch. The shadow creature roared, tendrils of black mist swirling violently as it lunged toward them, but Jenkins stood firm, the light from the ledger growing brighter, searing through the creature's form. Suddenly, memories flooded Jenkins's mind, visions of the Ourang Medan's last moments. He saw the terrified crew, their faces twisted in silent screams, the captain clutching the cursed artifact, his sanity slipping away. He realized the artifact was a beacon, a trap set by an ancient force to lure souls into eternal torment. With renewed resolve, Jenkins raised the ledger high, the glowing pages illuminating the storm-tossed sea. "By the light of forgotten souls," he intoned, "I command you to be freed." A blinding flash erupted, the storm momentarily silenced as the shadow screamed and dissipated into the ether. The sea calmed, and the mark on Jenkins's arm faded to a gentle warmth. Adelaide smiled wearily. "It's over. The souls can rest now." Jenkins looked out over the calm waters, feeling a peace he hadn't known in days. But as they turned to head back, a faint whisper echoed on the breeze, a warning or perhaps a promise. The ocean held more secrets still. The sea was calm now, almost peaceful, as Jenkins and Adelaide guided their small boat back toward the distant shoreline. The oppressive darkness that had clung to the waters for so long seemed to lift, replaced by a strange, gentle glow, as if the ocean itself was sighing in relief. Jenkins rubbed his arm, where the burning mark had once seared like fire. Now, it was gone, leaving only a faint warmth, a reminder of the battle fought and won. Adelaide looked toward the horizon. "The souls of the Ourang Medan's crew, they're free, no longer bound by the artifact's curse." Jenkins nodded, but his mind was still heavy with questions. How did the ship's crew die? What was the true nature of that evil? Adelaide sighed. It was a curse older than any living memory. The artifact was a prison for an ancient voice, the Whisperer, that fed on fear and despair. When the captain found it, the curse took hold, driving them all mad. Jenkins shivered. And the explosion? The sinking? The artifact's final defense, to prevent anyone from releasing the Whisperer. But it failed, because you had the strength to fight. Suddenly, the air shimmered, and a gentle breeze carried the faintest melody. Haunting, beautiful, and oddly comforting. A glowing figure appeared beside Jenkins, a transparent, smiling sailor nodding in gratitude. The spirit whispered, "Thank you for freeing us." Jenkins felt tears sting his eyes. He had faced unspeakable horror and survived. But the miracle was not just in survival, it was in redemption, in releasing trapped souls and breaking an ancient curse. As dawn broke, Jenkins and Adelaide sailed back to shore, the sun rising over calm waters, promising a new beginning. The sea held its secrets, but some stories had finally found their end. The end.